Homeworld 3. Let's talk about this. What do I think of when I think of Homeworld? I think innovative real-time strategy coupled with a brilliantly told story. I also think of a vast opportunity for modding support. Mods are how I discovered Homeworld. Technically it was Homeworld 2 I discovered first, when I first saw footage of Star Wars Warlords. At first I thought this was some amazing Star Wars game that I'd never heard of before, only to discover that this was a total conversion mod for Homeworld 2. Initially that was off-putting. I didn't want this weird strategy game that I'd never heard of before. I just wanted to play with Imperial Star Destroyers against the Rebel Alliance and all that. But, well, I decided that in order to play this amazing Star Wars mod and all these other mods that I'd found like Babylon 5, War Without End, and Star Trek Continuum, I needed to get my hands on Homeworld 2. And I did, through some slightly funky means, but that was back on my old Advent laptop, and it could hardly manage Homeworld 2. That Advent laptop was new in 2005. Homeworld 2 was only 2 years old at the time that laptop came out, so it was quite demanding. And so I turned to Homeworld 2's predecessor, Homeworld. I have two great regrets when it comes to the original Homeworld. The first is that it took me until 2012 to play it, that I'd never even heard of it before. And my second regret is that I ruined the story because I thought that I would never play it, so I looked up the Wikipedia article and read through the plot synopsis. I'm really terrible at doing things like that. The gameplay was, for the time, absolutely revolutionary. Real-time strategy games before Homeworld, such as the Command & Conquer series, all had a 2D plane of movement. This was one of, if not the first, 3D strategy game that you were able to control the movement of your ships, not just on a 2D plane of movement, but also moving them up and down relative to the map. I can't think of anything else that did that before this. If there was something, do let me know in the comments, but this was certainly a pioneer, if not the pioneer. Combat in the game was also incredible. If you didn't assign a formation to your strike craft, they would put themselves into little groups of two. You'd have a leader and a wingman, and they would work together. You need to remember that the original Homeworld released in 1999. The things they achieved back then are incredible. One of my other favourite strategy games of all time is Star Wars Empire at War. And even though that is younger, not by much, only 7 years, it still doesn't have all of the nuances of this. Sure, it featured both ground and space combat, but the fact is, you had to control your ships in 2D plane of movement. Homeworld did that 7 years before. When Homeworld was remastered in 2015, Gearbox and Blackbird used the Homeworld 2 engine as a basis, and it wasn't a bad decision. But in doing so, it just lost a little bit of that magic. The strike craft no longer group into little pairs. Mine layer corvettes work differently. There's just lots of little things that make it Homeworld, but not quite the original Homeworld, and that is a little bit sad, though I do have to admit the remaster was needed. Homeworld was a very good looking game for its time, but the remaster just even better, and it still holds up 9 years later. Of course, Homeworld isn't just about the gameplay, it's also about the story. And spoilers ahead, but this game has such an amazing story.
No one's left. Everything's gone. Carrick is burning.
The beginning of Mission 3 has got to be one of the most gut-wrenching moments in all of RTS history. You think you're going back to warn the people of Carrick that their lives are in danger, only to discover that the danger had already come and gone on its way. Punctuated by Samuel Barber's Agnus Dei, which I cannot play the entirety of because copyright. It's just... it just works. And this is the moment that I will never forgive myself for spoiling by reading a Wikipedia article. Some have compared the story of Homeworld to Battlestar Galactica, and they're not wrong. It is very similar premises. But Homeworld, it does it in its own different way, and you can't fault them for it. Homeworld 2, on the other hand, it's different. The gameplay is better and worse, and the story is something that most Homeworld fans agree is not as good as that from the original. It has its fans. I like the gameplay. It certainly was good enough to provide the basis for the Homeworld remasters. Homeworld 2's story of a sort of space messiah was met with mixed reactions. Generally positive, I think. It's not hated by the Homeworld fan community. It's just not seen as particularly great. And if I'm being honest, I think it's kind of forgettable. Despite learning about Homeworld 2 first, despite reading that one's story first, despite the fact that it's the one I most recently played until the recording of this video, I can barely remember much about Homeworld 2's story, whilst Homeworld 1's story is something I can remember almost everything about. It's really kind of strange. I guess maybe I need to go and play it again. If there's one thing we can all agree on, though, is that the soundtrack of Homeworld 1, Homeworld 2, and even the prequel Deserts of Carrick are all pretty good. Paul Ruskay is the man who is responsible for scoring each and every single one of the Homeworld games. It was only for Homeworld Cataclysm that he was not the sole composer, instead working alongside Greg Sabbitz. I'm going to say this right here, right now, if we ever get a Homeworld TV show, I want to hear Paul Ruskay's music. No one else's. Speaking of Cataclysm, I feel it does deserve a quick mention here. I acknowledge that this game is very highly regarded amongst the Homeworld fan base. I do appreciate the story, I love the story, I just never got to grips with the gameplay. For whatever reason, it just never quite agreed with me the same way that Homeworld 1 did. I've tried to play it, and I just couldn't get it to work. And I guess that's okay. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you're never gonna be good at something. I've acknowledged that with Cataclysm. I can still acknowledge it's a great game, even if I'm not great at it myself. After the acquirement and dissolution of Sierra Entertainment in 2004, Homeworld was dormant for 12 years, until Gearbox bought the rights to the Homeworld IP, and Blackbird Interactive gave us the first Homeworld game, in a sense, since 2003. Homeworld Deserts of Karak in 2016 might not be quite the same Homeworld game as we're used to, a space combat game. This one is purely land combat. But it's a Homeworld game in the sense of its story and its lore, and it's something that I have come to appreciate. Not everyone has liked it quite so much as me. Some people did not like the gameplay, some people thought that the story was lacking. Personally, I think the story is pretty good. The gameplay is pretty basic, but still good for what it is. And I do believe that this is a worthy addition to the Homeworld franchise. I love the idea of this gigantic tracked carrier, this land carrier, just roaming all over this desert planet, trying to find the Cartober. I only recently started playing the campaign again, for only the second time, just to get a refresher of how the story goes. It's not as good as Homeworld, and it's maybe somewhere in the same vicinity as Homeworld 2, but this game was how Blackbird should have done Homeworld 3. It had a decent story, and it had decent mechanics, and while it replaced the original black and white hand-drawn posters for cutscenes between missions that were in the original games, the way that they did cutscenes in this game was tastefully done. A new way of doing it whilst still keeping in line with the sort of comic book aesthetic of the original cutscenes. It may have been Blackbird's first attempt at a Homeworld game, but it was a pretty solid attempt, and I'm happy that we got this game. I really am. It's just a shame that what they followed up with was not worthy. The date is August 2019. I had only been able to play Homeworld Remastered for about a year and a half. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, Homeworld 3 was announced to the world. You cannot believe the hype that I was going through when I watched this trailer on the, what was it, the Gamescom live stream? Was it E3? I don't remember exactly where we first saw this trailer, but the moment I saw this gate spinning up, I knew that this was it. Homeworld 3, the first mainline Homeworld game since 2003. And of course the first since Deserts of Karak. And it was going to release in late 2022, if I remember correctly. Unfortunately, that's not how it worked out. It got delayed multiple times until it's only released in May of 2024. But it was coming. Grown men cried on this day. And I think grown men once again cried when the game released, but not for the reasons that they did when this trailer dropped. You see, the Homeworld IP had been acquired from the ruins of Sierra and from Relic Entertainment and into the possession of none other than Gearbox Software, who gave us, among other things, okay, sure, Gearbox was only publishing the game. Blackbird Interactive were the ones who were developing it. But the fact is, there was still that shadow of Aliens Colonial Marines hanging over the development of this title, and it's something that we should have all taken to heart. And yet the evidence we had was that BBI were capable. They could create a good Homeworld game. They gave us Homeworld Deserts of Karak, a faithful title, one that I hold pretty close, that I love, that is recommended to be played. So many people recommend that you play Deserts of Karak after playing Homeworld 1, before moving on to something like Cataclysm or Homeworld 2. They gave us Deserts of Karak with a team of something like 20 people, especially because BBI was made up of several former Homeworld developers. They worked on the original 2 games. These guys knew what they were doing, and they had at least one of the writers from Homeworld 1 and 2 on board. These guys could not have possibly have gone wrong. And yet something did go wrong. I can forgive the long development time. It was not a priority project. There was only, 20 people working on the game. They crowdfunded the game rather than Gearbox actually giving them all the money and saying, here, give us a Homeworld game. They crowdfunded it. And I was one of those crowdfunders. I backed the game the moment you were able to do so. Over the past 5 years, BBI and Gearbox have been telling us that they are going to stay faithful to the Homeworld games. That they would create something that we would all love. And I feel like they didn't. There's something that we need to remember about the Homeworld games. They've never been particularly character driven. There have been characters, and we can fall in love with them, but the games have not been about the characters. They have not been front and centre. If anything, your ships have been the characters. Yet for some reason, they decided to make Fleet Command and Fleet Intelligence essentially the main characters of the game. Obviously, we've got massive spoilers ahead for the Homeworld 3 story, because that's where I'm going to start. The Homeworld 3 story revolves around Imogen Sajet, Karen Sajet, and the Incarnate Queen, who is the big bad. The problem with the Incarnate Queen is we get no clear motive for why she's the big bad. Apparently she wants to create an entire race of navigators, as she calls them. Essentially people who have been bound with the starship. Which is what the Bentusi were before they all died. And very early on in the game she does what you're seeing on the screen here right now. She has just killed millions of people because she wants to turn everyone into navigators, I think. She kills a lot of people for no clear reason. This establishes that the Incarnate Queen is an utterly psychopathic murderer. That's a minimum of 16 million people who have been eliminated, who have been killed. Okay? So, obviously she needs to be dealt with. Which would mean, you know, killing her in return. But over the course of the game, we learn that she's just really lonely, and she really just needed a hug. She needed some companionship forever. So, what happens? Karen Sajet takes her into hyperspace or something, apparently killing them both. I don't know. It doesn't get explained. Did she get hyperspaced somewhere? Did she die? Nobody knows, because nobody explains. We just get this massive hyperspace window, and we're led to believe that they're going somewhere together. But yes, clearly this psychopathic mass murderer just needed a hug, and that's it. So, is she dead? Is she still alive? Are they somewhere else? Not a clue. Later on, when we first encounter incarnate forces, we discover that not one of her ships have hyperdrive cores. Meaning she can bend hyperspace to her will, essentially. Use it to send her ships everywhere. And yet, a couple of the missions rely on the incarnate coming through hyperspace gates, like proper big hyperspace gates built by the progenitors however many millions of years ago. The Queen can send these ships wherever she wants using her own abilities. She doesn't need the hyperspace network of gates. She just needs her own magical powers and send her ships anywhere, and she can defeat the Hogarans just like that. One really egregious continuity error happens in Mission 2, where you see this pirate carrier using its hyperspace window to carve out a part of a asteroid that it hyperspaces into. Which is something I fully expected. When the moment I saw that hyperspace window, I was like, oh, that carrier is going to materialize inside the asteroid by using its window to carve out a section of the rock. And Imogen says what that carrier just did should not be possible. Excuse me? This was a plot point in Deserts of Karak. A whole bunch of ships hyperspaced inside of Karak because their hyperspace cores got interfered with. And their hyperspace windows carved out sections of the planet's crust and put the ships inside the ground. This was known. The Hogarans knew this, unless it somehow got lost and forgotten. But this is established hyperspace lore. They know it can happen, and yet they just forgot. And what's even more egregious is that Imogen uses this exact same hyperspace technique when hyperspacing into the penultimate mission, apparently with no modifications to the hyperdrive. Gee, Imogen, maybe it was possible after all. And do you want to know the worst thing about the Homeworld 3 story? It's not just about how much of a mess it is, but it's also the fact that that Homeworld 1 and 2 writer we talked about earlier, if what I'm hearing is correct, that person got fired halfway through development of the game. And who ended up replacing them? None other than SBI, a group of fraudsters who claim to be all about DEI, but are actively racist and sexist. Clearly these are the best people to write a Homeworld game. Okay, enough about the story. How does the rest of the game play? How does the game actually play? Well, not great. Here are just a few of the issues that I have with the game. First up is a lack of unit variety, at least on the Higaran side. The Incarnate has plenty of ships, except they only have one kind of fighter. The Higarans don't have any proper corvettes. Corvettes from Homeworld games of the past have always been anti-strike craft. They've always been there to deal with fighters and bombers. You had light corvettes, heavy corvettes, multi-gun corvettes, gunships, pulsar gunships, missile corvettes, all kinds of different corvettes that were meant to deal with scouts, interceptors, attack bombers, assault craft, whatever, you name it. If it was a fighter, corvettes were your nemesis. In Homeworld 3, the Higaran faction only gets access to a single class of corvette, the railgun corvette, which is not what a corvette is built for. It's a corvette with a great big gun underneath that does significant damage to things like frigates and capital ships. But that's not the role of a corvette. I mean, sure, maybe make one or two for that purpose, but we're the ones that are meant to deal with the fighters. During production of the game, BBI showcased a railgun frigate, which is what the ion cannon frigate is now. It uses the same model that the railgun frigate was going to have, and that was something that I thought was pretty cool, but it was replaced with the ion cannon frigate, which, given that it's Higaran, makes sense. But clearly Blackbird liked the idea of a railgun something, so they scaled it down, slapped it onto a corvette, and forgot about every other kind of corvette. Okay. Great. What about other units that are lacking? Well, in Homeworld 1 and 2, you had things like gravwell generators, cloak generators, sensor arrays that you could build and deploy. In Homeworld 3, all you have are turrets. That's it. That's all the special ships you can get. You can't even get proximity sensors, which would detect cloaked ships, but then again, they don't matter, because you don't get cloaks in Homeworld 3. Why not? In fact, you can get cloaks. You can get them on the Higaran attack bombers. But the Incarnate forces don't get a proximity sensor. They don't get anything that would detect those cloaked ships. So, yeah, excuse me? In Homeworld 1, 2, and Remastered, you had mine layer corvettes. Those have been replaced by a mine layer frigate. But only the Higarans get access to that, and only for the campaign, which they're only useful for like 2 missions, and that's it. But they could have so much usability in skirmish, but you don't get the option because they're locked to the campaign. So, mine layer frigates, there's no Incarnate version of that ship, and you don't get them outside of the campaign. I want to use my mine layers, thank you. Something I used to do in Homeworld 1 multiplayer, way back in the day. I created huge walls of mines. I even threw off some experts, some veterans of this game. And yet, don't get the option. I can't do those exact same things I did back in 2012, because I'm just not given a mine layer frigate to be able to do that with. Next issue is more of a minor one, it's more of a naming issue. But there are two different incarnate frigates that are called missile frigate. One's a missile frigate and the other's a smart missile frigate. Which one is which? Well, for the Higarans, they have the ion cannon frigate and a torpedo frigate. So apparently one of these missile frigates is meant to be the equivalent to an ion cannon frigate, I think, much like you had in Homeworld 2, where the equivalent to the Higaran ion cannon frigate was the Vega heavy missile frigate. At least that's what I'm assuming, because I don't know which missile ship is meant to be which. I think the equivalent to the torpedo frigate is the smart missile one, but what would really clear this up was if you would rename one of them, just to make it a bit more clear that a smart missile frigate is not meant to engage strike craft or whatever. I don't know. Something that has been mentioned by several other YouTubers and players is that attack move appears to be severely restrictive, if not completely absent from the game design. I have noticed on occasion that an ion cannon frigate will keep pace with a unit that's moving and be able to shoot at it on the move, but you can't get the ships to do complex maneuvers. They just don't seem to work the same way that they did in remastered Homeworld 2, Homeworld 1, Cataclysm. They're just not working the same way, which, for a veteran of the franchise, would be pretty frustrating. When playing in skirmish mode, the AI just spams ships. There are no tactics. All it does is it uses all of its resources to create as many units as it can, and then it just throws them at you. It doesn't wait, because there's no rush time protection. It just, the moment it has enough ships, that it just starts sending them straight towards your mothership and starts just fighting, and it just becomes a clusterfuck of ships. Something that's been noted about the super capital grade ships, the destroyer and the battlecruiser appear to be completely useless, which for the ships that are supposed to be the two most powerful ships you can get in the game is not good. They're meant to be not great against strikecraft, but apparently they seem to be better against strikecraft than even the assault frigate, which is meant to be able to shoot down the strikecraft most efficiently of anything. Like, what? Literally, you hover over the destroyer and the battlecruiser, and the tooltips that come up show that it is strong versus everything. No! That is not how it's meant to be. In Homeworld 1, heavy cruisers were useless against strikecraft and corvettes. They were only strong against frigates and other super capital ships. In Homeworld 2, the battlecruisers had some minor anti-corvette weaponry. That was more or less all they could do. Just some very minor spread out pulsar weapons. That was it. In Homeworld 3, I have seen these battlecruisers and destroyers murdering entire flocks of fighters, whilst being simultaneously useless against frigates and other battlecruisers. What's the point of these things? They're completely wrong. They're so unbalanced, and not in a good way. And then there's the Mothership, which, in the campaign at least, is one of the fastest units you can you can use. Seriously, it gets access to this overburner upgrade, some sort of like in the second mission or something, and it starts outrunning the recon units which are, behind the probes, the fastest unit you have access to, except the Mothership. The Mothership can scout for itself, apparently. What's the point? Why is it so fast? That is not the purpose of the Mothership. It's meant to be slow and ungainly, not the second fastest unit in the game after probes. At least that's not a problem in skirmish, because the Motherships in skirmish are just really slow, which makes sense. Unfortunately, something else about skirmish is that you don't get the ability to hyperspace inside of the skirmish maps like you could in Homeworld 1, Homeworld Cataclysm, Homeworld 2, and Homeworld Remastered. So, if you're in a tight spot and you need to hyperspace your ships out of there, you can't. You don't get that option. Which probably wouldn't matter anyway, because the maps in skirmish are so small that hyperspace would be completely useless anyway. Most of the time, except, if you're in that tight spot. And speaking of the skirmish maps, you only get 6 of them, and the amount of resources on these maps are highly spread out in nodes, similar to Deserts of Karak, and there's not a lot of resources in the end. The only reason that you can see me with 1 million in this particular game is because I used WeMod to use a trainer to give me a resource multiplier, which I would only ever use in single player because I don't play Homeworld in multiplayer anymore. If you do use WeMod, only use it in single player, okay? Thank you. I prefer the resources the way they were in Homeworld 1, 2, Remastered. I prefer them like that, where you had lots of resources all in small pockets around the map, not all over the place. I mean, sure, I guess you're fighting for them more often, but I don't like the way that Homeworld 3 does resources, especially when you consider the fact that the Higaran resource collector controller thing, because they're all mashed into one unit now, that counts as your capture vehicle. Yeah, in Homeworld 1, you had salvage corvettes. In Homeworld 2, you had marine frigates. In Homeworld Cataclysm, you had to use your resource collectors, or workers as they were known in that game. But the difference with Cataclysm is you could build a lot more workers so that you wouldn't necessarily have your resourcing operations completely negated by capturing 1 or 2 ships. In Homeworld 3, you can only build a maximum of 8 resource collectors, meaning that if you want to capture an enemy ship, you have to damage your own resource collecting capabilities in order to capture 1 ship. Just 1. That is unacceptable. And what makes it even worse is that the Incarnate gets a dedicated capture unit, the Capture Corvette. Why does the Incarnate get access to that, but the Higarans don't? That does not make any sense to me. And now I'm going to moan about paid DLC and customization of the units, funnily enough. As you can see, I'm using a Incarnate fleet using tie-down colours from Homeworld 1, except for whatever reason the colours are reversed. So the base colour is red, and I had to manually switch it to yellow, because that's actually how it is. That's irritating, but yeah. Turns out that there are 4 different engine trail colours you can get in Homeworld 3. Blue, red, yellow, and purple. And that's it. And purple is locked behind the paywall of the deluxe edition. Oh, also, look in the background, we've got a visual bug. Going into Sensors Manager fixes it, but yeah, it seems that the Sensors Manager blue domes and circles sticks into the normal gameplay for some reason, and going into Sensors Manager fixes it. It's not unlike those black voids that I've seen in early gameplay of Fallout 76. Yeah, just gets larger and larger. Who knows, maybe it could take over the entire map. Not sure. Anyway, where was I? Ah yes, paid DLC. There are 4 ship trails in the game, and one of them is locked behind a paywall. And yet, in Homeworlds of years past, the colour of the ship trail was locked to one of the colours of your ships. So there are 2 colours you can put on your ship, your primary colour and your secondary colour. In Homeworld 1 and 2 and Remastered, the ship trail colour was based off of your primary colour, whilst in Homeworld Cataclysm it was the secondary colour that mattered. Either way, one of the colours of your ship contributed to the colour of the ship trail. So your ship could be yellow and it would leave a yellow trail, red trail, green trail, pink trail, so on, so forth. And yet, it doesn't matter what colour your ships are in Homeworld 3, they can leave only one of 3 colours, and if you didn't buy the deluxe edition, like I did, you can only use 3 of those colours. Wow! And then there's the DLC factions that are coming. Now, that's not new, okay. Deserts of Karak had DLC factions, the Soban and the Knef, which were locked to skirmish only. Fine, okay. Thing is though, I have heard rumours that the DLC factions that are coming in year 1 of the Homeworld 3 roadmap could well only be limited to the new War Games mode, which I would not be happy about because my favourite mode has always been Skirmish, and if it's locked, if the new factions are locked to War Games, let's just say I won't be a very happy bunny. And it seems that we have a prime candidate for the first of these paid DLC factions, and that would be the Kalen Pirate faction you fight in missions 2 and 3, because they have a carrier, a fighter, and a frigate that could be used for a War Games fleet, and, well, they could make a couple more, but I'd really like to see a Mothership so I could use these ships in Skirmish, because I've always preferred Skirmish. Let me just say that I'm not a fan of the War Games mode. Some people like the concept, and it has promise, I will admit, but I'm not a fan of it. Especially when you get bugs like the data spires and the other various objectives just vanishing out of existence, leaving you incapable of completing the objective, meaning you have to leave the mission and not get any of the XP that you earned, which is just absolutely great, isn't it? Performance is another limiting factor, because this game, for some bizarre reason, was shipped with de novo DRM malware. Wonderful. Who knows if it will ever get removed. Yeah, that's not helping the performance of this game, which is a real damn shame, because this game is gorgeous. It looks incredible. Something that disappointed me about the reveal of the Homeworld Remastered collection was that when you saw the Vega flagship explode, it didn't leave any sizable chunks that looked like parts of the Vega flagship. It didn't break spectacularly into bits and pieces like I wanted it to. Instead, whenever a large ship blows up in Remastered, it just leaves generic chunks of debris behind that can be salvaged, which was something that I was disappointed by. In Homeworlds 3, whenever a ship explodes, it leaves chunks that are shaped like the ship behind. You can see right here, that mothership that exploded earlier on, the chunks of it are still floating around. It's gorgeous! what an amazing looking game! And the performance is, when you've got a lot of ships, is just so bad. I run the benchmark, and within seconds it goes from 120 frames per second down to 24! It's like I'm still playing on my old Sony Vaio laptop. The performance is god awful! And I'm not running on some shitty machine. Let me just give you a reminder of what my specs of my PC are. I have a Gigabyte Z790 XAX motherboard, an Intel i7 13700K rated at 3.4 GHz. I have 32 GB of DDR5 RAM and an RTX 4070. This computer is no slouch by any stretch of the imagination, and yet when you have a lot of units floating around on Homeworld 3, it's like I've gone back to my Sony Vaio laptop that I had right up until 2018. 5 years I struggled with that laptop, and I still had some great moments on it despite the setbacks, the drawbacks of that thing. Yet I didn't want to go back to that kind of performance when I got this machine. That's the purpose of why I got this machine, so I would never really have bad performance again. And yet, even when running with DLSS on ultra performance, it's like I'm still playing on that laptop. I know I've said that a million different times by now. It's just, I want this game to be better. I do have some positive things to say about the game. Once again, soundtrack by Paul Ruskay. It's pretty good, but I don't think it's quite on par with Homeworld 2. I think it's good, but it's not amazing. It's not stellar. It's good, okay? At least there's one good thing about the game. Something else about the game that I like. Multiple units can be constructed at once. That was something you could do in Homeworld 1 and Cataclysm, but in Homeworld 2, each production-capable ship could only build one thing at a time. There were mods that allowed you to build maybe two types of ship at a time, like the Star Trek Continuum mod would let you build two ships at a time, mainly because that only had one production-capable vessel, I think. But base Homeworld 2 and Homeworld Remastered had this one unit at a time limit. Homeworld 3 allows you to build everything at once, which I personally like. Okay? But maybe if you got rid of that, it would curtail the AI spam issues from earlier. So I'm not sure which one I would prefer. If I would want to keep the ability to construct everything at once, or to get rid of the AI spam, which would mean getting rid of that thing. That's an issue to contend with. War Games, I mentioned, has promise, but I don't personally like the mode. If you like it yourself, that's great. Have all the fun in the world that you want with that mode. I personally don't like it, especially because it's filled with bugs. I also quite like unit design. I think some of the ships look quite nice, though some of them do look a little bit generic. So that's something to figure out. I just hope that the factions that come with the DLC end up looking good, unique enough. And level design isn't bad either. This map you're seeing right now, as we get the the sensors manager glitch again, Boran Ice Shelf is incredible design. Lots of the levels are very gorgeous looking. And also you've got the ability to make ships go inside of the structures and the levels and go underneath the map, if you like, as well. Whereas Homeworld 2 was not able to get the ships to go through the debris fields and the like, unless it was like a fighter, I guess. There was little of that in Homeworld 2 and Homeworld 1. So Homeworld 3 having that ability, whilst I don't think many people are going to be using it, because that's quite a sophisticated level of micro needed, I think it's nice to have, and if you think you can build strategies around going through the megaliths and the ice shelf, go for it. I think that could be something that could be game-changing if it just gets ironed out a little bit more. But I think I've run out of good things, because all I can think of is one extra little moan about the game, and that's almost every unit in the game has a special ability, which basically amounts to do some more damage, take less damage. The attack bombers can cloak, and that's about it. Everything else just does do more damage, do less damage, make every other unit do more damage, capture ship occasionally, repair ship. That's it. There's very little in variety in terms of ship abilities, as we see a battle cruiser losing to some frigates, unless there's another battle cruiser that's just come out of the incarnate Mothership out there. So, yeah, battle cruisers not great, as we already established. In 2019, Blackbird Interactive and Gearbox promised us a Homeworld game. And I feel we only have that in the most vague of descriptions. There are similar themes and names and ideas, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't feel right. We're missing something. And sure, it's not just the level of technical polish. This game has barely even been out a month. It hasn't even been out a month as I record this. And yet, it doesn't feel enough like Homeworld to me. The story is a mess. It's based too much on a character arc. It is protagonist driven, but the protagonist should be the Mothership, not Fleet Command. And sure, she's a protagonist, but the protagonist should be the fleet as a whole, and not the people themselves. And that is one of the major issues in the story. It's not all of the issues, but one of them. And it just doesn't make it as compelling. Losing the art style for the cutscenes was also something that shouldn't have been done. We should have had something at least like Deserts of Karak, and yet we got something that's trying to be more like a movie. Which is nice, but it doesn't fit with Homeworld. Coupled with numerous gameplay issues, performance issues, all kinds of other issues, and we are left with a title that is lacking in so many ways. And that is so disappointing. It really is. I wanted to love this game when I first heard about it back in 2019, and now, I'm still waiting for Homeworld 3. I really am. Do yourself a favour. If you want a Homeworld game, buy Homeworld Remastered instead. It's a billion times better. And I really hate saying this, but don't forget to like and subscribe! Yay!